Hi, I'm Mina Malik Hussain, and you're watching The Coffee Table. Today, we've got a show of crucial importance to all of us, and you'll find out why in just a second. Joining me today on the set are two of our leading therapists here in Lahore, and we're going to talk about mental health in Pakistan and the world. So, joining me today are Omar Tauseef and Daheem Dean. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Thank you for coming, being on the sofa with me on this semicircle of truths. So, both of you guys have got an established, a very well-known set of practices here in Lahore. And sort of first off, because these are things that a lot of people think about when they think of therapy and they think of mental health, is that what really is it? Like, I know that there's therapy, there's psychotherapy, there's psychiatry, there's psychology, and it all sounds kind of similar, but it's obviously not similar. So Omar, could you sort of tell us what the difference is?
Okay. So, I mean, there are two terms we could be using. One is mental health and another is mental illness.
Okay.
So when we're talking about mental illnesses, there are many of them which may require medication. And medication obviously can only be done with a medical professional. And in the field of mental health, someone who's medical professional who can provide prescribed medication is called a psychiatrist. So the job of a psychiatrist is primarily to diagnose and to help with the medication management.
Yeah, for mental illnesses.
Yes, for mental illnesses or even for certain mental health conditions. If someone is feeling that their life circumstances are such that, let's say that someone is just having trouble with sleeping, now that may not be a mental illness per se, but if they need something that can help them sleep, that's got to be prescribed by a medical professional. Then psychologists and mental health counselors or therapists, they are primarily working the same job, but there may be differences in the populations or the way they work. But generally, psychologists are working with briefer therapies, which could be under 20 sessions, whereas mental health counselors or psychotherapists a lot of times may work relationally or they may work for longer periods of time. There are lots of other finer details about this.
Okay, so it's basically the sort of toss-up between somebody who prescribes medication and is a sort of licensed medical practitioner and somebody who you go to talk to. Is that a sort of reductive way to describe it?
Yeah, talk therapy, you can say that.
Yeah.
A psychologist or a psychotherapist, the main tool is talk therapy. So as Omar said that, you know, it's a psychologist would have brief therapy, solution-focused more.
So the difference is that you're not an MBBS doctor as a psychologist.
As a psychologist or a psychotherapist.
Yeah, and a therapist or what was it?
Unless if a psychologist has done a PhD, they're still not an MD doctor,
but they can't give you medicine even if they have a PhD.
Either way,
Yeah.
They can't prescribe.
So both of you have trained from the United States in therapy, in mental health therapy. So, and you've got a very established practice now. So it's been about 10 years since you've been working in Pakistan.
Yeah, in September it's going to be 11 years.
Yeah. So what do you think? Like, I know that abroad, a lot of people have been in therapy for a while now. It's been a thing that people have been doing for much longer abroad. And my own limited experience is that, you know, you read about it in books, you see it in films, and people are going to therapy, and it's a thing. But it hasn't really been a thing in Pakistan very recently. Do you think it's fairly recent, this development, this interest in therapy?
I mean, yeah, Pakistan is a young country too. You have to realize that.
Yes, that's true.
So it is a very young field. I mean, this is my 11th year finishing. So in the past, I would say 6 to 8 years that it has really picked up. It's really, really picked up. And the trend has changed into more seeking psychotherapy, therapy, than, you know, just solutions-focused work.
Right.
Or there's another kind of therapy, which is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So, and the generation that's coming in, you know, it's, you're looking at anywhere from 21 to 45, 48.
Okay, so it's not just millennials who are like, oh, you know, I need help and I need to sort of find somebody to talk to. It's a broad range, of ages who are being able to sort of come forward.
Yes.
Be like
people are actually seeking this sort of help now.
Yeah.
A lot more.
And since therapy is a sort of, it takes a commitment for it to be effective. Like you said, that you have to develop a relationship over several years even to be able to really sort of get the most out of that, right? true. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I
no,
think I
I'll
would
second that. That I think psychiatry and psychology has been around in Pakistan for a very long time.
That's right, has.
Our big universities like Government College, FC College, they've had psychology departments for
Yes.
many decades. They've been producing psychologists. I'm presuming that psychiatry has been offered here as far as maybe medicine has been done in this country. But I think that the sort of qualifications that people like Daheem and I have, specific qualifications like marriage and family therapy or mental health counseling, that's fairly recent. Where I think that in the last 10 years, I think that there's been a lot more people. So I started working 8 years ago, and I think that at that point, Daheem was one of the people I knew who had done her degree from the US, and then maybe having met one or two more people. And then I think that every year we've had at least 4 or 5 or 6 people being added to that mix, where I think when we first met, we were a group of 4 or 5 therapists.
Which is tiny. That's a
Very
very
tiny.
small
Very
group.
limited.
In a big city like Lahore, 4 or 5 people who knew, who sort of agreed on certain ethical principles, had degrees from abroad, from Australia, from the US, UK, and who wanted to establish an ethical practice or already had an ethical practice. And I think that over time that group has expanded. I mean, from maybe 5, I think we're a bunch of maybe at least 20 people in
And
Lahore.
that is so promising, because to me, that, and you talked about an ethical practice. So to me, if there are more people who want to get into the field, that means that there are people who are, you have clients. There's obviously a market, but there's also a market. There's obviously the people who've been in therapy, who are going to therapy, can trust their therapist, and I feel like that's a huge part of even getting help for mental health issues, is being able to find somebody that you trust. And culturally, this is something that
it's actually both ways. From my practice, what I've seen is confidentiality, because it's still seen as a taboo. It's something like, okay, are you going to the therapist? It's becoming, the acceptance is there, it's coming in, but at the same time, people are very cautious of it, nervous about it too, definitely. Maybe that's a good word to use. So, confidentiality is a huge thing. It's a huge thing. People want to be able to be, okay, knowing that, it's going to stay confidential.
Yes, quite right. And it's not like that people don't have issues or that they never did and it's just a newfangled thing. It's just that maybe there weren't enough people that you could trust to go and speak to.
When I first started working in Pakistan, that's what really surprised me, that a lot of my clients were just reporting that the very basics of therapy, such as professionalism, keeping time, keeping appointments, keeping the client's stuff to the therapist and not disclosing it, not really acknowledging your clients publicly or speaking about them or naming them. I mean, even those very basics, judging clients, I mean, just the basics such as issues of sexuality, issues of trouble in marriages, infidelity, substance use, people feeling really judged by their mental health practitioners, which really dissuaded them from even going to therapy, or they may have been referred to me by a source, but they may have a law reservation. So one of the first things they addressed is that we're really concerned that whatever we tell you, will it remain here? So, I mean, we've come really a long way from that time, where I think the consumer is also somewhat becoming educated, where they expect better from a therapist, that it's just not acceptable if a client is going to be spoken about in any way.
Absolutely. And I think that that's also something like, culturally, it's strange because we tend to overshare a lot. Like there's no sense of personal boundaries in many ways. You'll be in a doctor's clinic and the person sitting next to you will be like, so, you're sick, what have you got? And you're like, you might want to talk about it. And it's so
a
weird.
cultural thing.
That you can, on one level, be sharing such personal details with a complete stranger, but at the same time, feel really scared talking to somebody in a structured, formalized way. Like, I find that interesting.
And, it is actually a very sacred place, too, because you bring in stuff, or over time stuff emerges, which is very precious to the person. Maybe it's something that they don't know, they're not even aware of, and it comes into the room in your relationship, especially when it's a long-term relationship. So it is something to value and take care of.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you said that a lot of times therapists don't acknowledge their clients in public. Why is that?
I mean, if you were my client and I went out of my way to say hi to you, then anyone with me who doesn't know you can presume you're a client of mine and you didn't sign up for that. Or let's say, I don't know who you're with, maybe you're with a friend, a cousin, someone you've not told that you're in therapy. And now maybe if they know that I'm a therapist and I'm acknowledging you, and that places you in a tight spot that who is this person?
How do you know him?
Yeah, so I mean, when I say I won't acknowledge someone publicly, I won't, but if they wish to and they're saying hi to me, and I'm obviously going to greet them back, but I won't be the one who's
You're not going to be like,
that. Yeah.
You're like, I don't know you. Who are you?
You know, but Umar is right, and I think it sets the precedent of confidentiality too. You know, really, because it's a young field, confidentiality, ethics, people are still trying to get comfortable with this. It's very important. Yeah. It's really important for the client to really know that it's their privilege.
Right.
It's their
so,
privilege.
Daheem, what kind of therapies are practitioners offering here? So I know that Omar does a lot of one-on-one therapy, but and you mentioned that, substance abuse and marriage counseling. So like what other kinds of things can you sort of seek therapy for?
So these are populations like addiction, marriage, couples counseling or family counseling or individual or adolescent or parent-child counseling together, like when you're working with really young children.
Okay.
So you work with the parent and the child together. These are populations, and then there are different types of therapies, like there's psychodynamic, which is long-term therapy. Then there is CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy. Yeah, initially I did. And then there's solution focus. So those are briefer therapies. So those are different types of therapies. Usually long-term clients are, like my practice has psychodynamic approach, very relational based.
Okay, but that's really interesting that parents can come to therapy with younger children as well. Because there's so many ideas about therapy that you have to be depressed or you have to be anxious or you have to have something ostensibly, quote unquote, amiss or wrong to go to therapy. But if, parents going to therapy with their kids, and that's not something, that sounds like something that's really healthy. Because there's so many things that happen in families that you just probably would need a professional to help.
Mina, even
address.
When you're working with an individual, you're working with them in a systemic way. Because though they are individuals, as Umar would agree, I think, is they bring their entire family with them. So you just don't, there's no way that you can work with an individual in isolation.
Yes.
And especially if you're working with like little kids who under 5, there's no way that you can work with a child alone because they're going to go back, into the system. Yes. And if you look at cognitively or emotionally, they haven't reached there where they can sustain on themselves.
Right.
By
so
themselves.
they need, in that case, a parent or guardian would need to sort of be there to help.
Yeah,
keep
even
the process
with
going.
Teenagers, you want, if there's a family discord or if there's an issue with one parent, you eventually, with the consent of your teenager, you would want the parent to come in. But especially with younger children, there's no way you can work. You can't.
Like Daheem said, there are issue-based counseling, population-based counseling, specialization, addictions, or working with the geriatric population, or working with young children, or working with special needs, or these are all issues. And then therapy can either be in a one-to-one individual capacity. That's primarily my work.
Yeah.
I don't work with groups. I don't work with families. I don't work with couples. Or another area of my interest is also to work with groups, such as let's say that I can just gather together 8 or 10 individuals with a similar enough issue. Let's say I'm working with trauma, and I can work with them in a group rather than working with them one-to-one. And the group can be a very effective and a very, not only time-wise, but as a modality, it's a very powerful way of people to work.
Wow, and that would, I think, require a sort of great sort of leap of trust also in a way.
Where confidentiality obviously is extremely important, which people can only open up with each other if they trust that what they're doing in that space will be held by other individuals. It will not be discussed outside of there, but it's a very, very profound and a very powerful way of transformation.
Oh, amazing. Like, in a way, do you think that it would be sort of fair to say that it would become like a support group, a super confidential support group, where you would feel just less alone in the world, that there are these people who can understand what you're going through.
I think that for a lot of substance use disorders, it's if they're on medication or if they've worked in a rehab setup, then once they return from there, for them to have an access to a support group where if I'm feeling weak on a particular day, then I have access to my group who can hold me, who can help me. So I mean, it's fairly common in countries abroad for there to be a lot of, for example, Alcoholic Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, and then groups for lots of issues, such as where a particular group may feel shame over a thing, such as if I'm a gambler and I want to be rehabilitated, I mean, rather than being shamed for it, I can work with a couple of people who relate to that, or where let's say the prison system has mandated someone to work within a group of individuals who've been assessed as having a certain issue. So those support groups can be very powerful ways of transformation.
That sounds really sort of such a hopeful place to be in. And we're just going to take a quick break and we will continue this fascinating conversation in just a minute. Don't go away. Hi, welcome back to the coffee table. We're talking to Omar, Tauseef and Daheem Deen about depression and trauma and mental health and what we can do to get well again, which is very hopeful and very fascinating at the same time. So tell me guys, what kind of things do you see, Daheem, do you see a pattern in the kind of issues that you see like people coming to you for in your local practice?
I wouldn't say pattern, I would say symptoms.
Okay.
You know, there is a common theme of symptoms. So depression, anxiety are some of the very common manifestations of some things happening in the back. You know, in person's mental health, the presenting issue would be they would come in because they're sad, their interest in life is not there, or they're working in, you know, their work is not going too well, or, you know, their relationships are not working out, or they have palpitations, or they have nervousness, or they have social anxiety, they can't meet people, or they have obsessive thoughts which are repetitive. So those are very common presenting issues, you know, very, very common. Or, you know, then there's this particular area which is trauma.
Right.
They're having a very hard time being able to stay put in the same place where they were, because now something which was hidden, which was unaddressed, unresolved, somewhere back has been triggered.
Oh.
So that's trauma. It can also manifest in depression and anxiety, but the other manifestation of trauma is very specific with flashbacks or nightmares, or, you know, just being not comfortable in the place where they're at, or having, you know, being scared, being afraid, and for having no reason in their current life.
Right.
So there's a common theme of symptoms, how they manifest, and then, you know, there is a common theme.
So Omar, what does trauma mean? Because, you know, sort of in a layman's way, you think of trauma as, you know, something bad happened to you in the sense that you had an accident or you got sick, or, you know, something terrible in a kind of physical way. But trauma can be psychological trauma as well.
So a standard way of looking at trauma is whatever. It's not something objective. It's something very subjective which has overwhelmed my safety of the world. Now that can be an accident, that could be abuse, that could be being lost in a mall, that could be anything. And
that happened to me when I was like 5.
So now the difference between maybe you and a person who may end up really being affected by that experience very deeply, maybe based on lots of other variances, someone who's genetically, their nervous system may be built in that way, or the personality may be in that way, where an experience is such that I am stuck in that. I re-experience it, I cannot recover from it, I continue to think of it, and it's enough to really affect my functionality, my going back to work, my being with friends, my enjoying life. I'm preoccupied by something that happened a while ago.
Yeah.
Now it's
and
a
you
lot.
Just kind of, you know, people say, okay, well, just get over it.
Yeah.
But you can't just get over things.
I mean, a small example I can give of that is that in most of the conflicts around the world, such as whenever a country has gone to a battlefield, whether that was ours or whether that was the US going to Iraq or Afghanistan.
Yes.
Now, there's a certain, whereas all the soldiers, they've been exposed to similar circumstances, to bombs going off, to death, destruction.
Violence.
A lot of that, but a certain segment of them, 20% of them, 25% of them may return with trauma symptoms. Now, sometimes if let's say that I am not even physically harmed myself, but I saw someone being physically harmed, there's even a chance that the one who was injured or maimed, they may not develop trauma symptoms, but I may as a result of seeing them.
Right.
And it may not be that even I who witnessed it may be affected by it, or the person who probably was directly affected by it, but that story that was related to someone in my base, someone who gets to know of it, they may be traumatized by it. So trauma is obviously it's an evolving concept where we're trying to learn about it, but it's not just that something happens where we say that, oh, here's a circumstance which is traumatizing.
Right.
So not everyone may be equally affected by a burglary.
Right.
Whereas someone may be traumatized by a burglary.
So everybody processes circumstances differently. So that means everybody's trauma and the way that they experience trauma is different. And it kind of it makes me wonder that we haven't, in our part of the world, like we haven't talked about trauma. And it is possible, and it is a thing that trauma gets passed down through generations as well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It does.
It does.
So,
yeah.
as sort of this particular part of the world, we've seen a fair share of violence, starting from the inception of this country, and sort of we've been through wars and we've been through a lot of sort of violent experiences. It's quite heartening to me to think that there is help for us and for a place to go and somebody to talk to process how we interact with the world. And that whole thing of, if you eat well and if you exercise, then you can sort of power through. But you can't necessarily power through things if you're genetically, like you said, genetically inclined to process the world a certain way.
Yeah, and then the circumstances kick in, and then that manifests.
Also about
So
coping.
it is
Everyone has a very different coping and support.
Right.
So sometimes if the right support is available for a person when something terrible has happened, that's the only thing that could really make a huge impact at that point, that the right help is received at the right time, and that may not go on to become something more complex or something more deeper that may affect a person.
So I'm just sort of thinking that sort of in terms of things like addiction, for example, and what might start out as a way of coping with an experience or a way of handling trauma or just sort of whatever ailment that one has, an underlying thing in addiction can sort of turn into something much worse. So sort of how does therapy help in addressing that? Sort of do you have to work with rehab centers or with doctors? Sort of how could one approach that?
Well, addiction itself has a life of its own, though it's a symptom of something, but the person would have to be detoxified under a medical practitioner, a psychiatrist. Then usually they are put on psychiatric medication because obviously the substance has, some sort of impact on their nervous system.
Okay.
So either they're going to be on antidepressants or antipsychotics or anti-anxiety, and then their meds are monitored. And once, the detox and the meds are stabilized, that's when, then therapy kicks in. So initially it's one-on-one, then group therapy, gradually family therapy, because again, you can't see addiction in it by itself. As initially I said, that person, there's a systemic approach to even individual person.
Yes.
So you bring the family in, and then you work with the family too, because that person is just the identified patient, like IP. In family therapy, we, sometimes parents bring in and they say, "Oh, fix my child."
Yeah. This is the only one.
This is the only one who has the problems. They have made our lives, so difficult. Blah blah blah. But it's really you're looking at the system. So again, same for addiction. So family therapy is part of it. So there are multiple steps, and then as Omar said, even with in being sober, there is you have a sponsor. That's a support, and then you go to your meetings, and then you go to your group therapy.
So it's a very sort of detailed, multi-pronged, multi-layered sort of approach to it.
Dependent on the substance. I mean, class A drugs like cocaine or meth or heroin, they may be a lot more difficult for those to be treated in an outpatient setup, or just with a group support. They may really need a detox first, or rehabilitation. That's for a psychiatrist or a addiction specialist to assess that at what level are we treating, and that depends on the severity of it and how long someone has been using. And then obviously every substance it depends that at what level of the addiction are they. Addiction is known to, like Daheem said, it can really neurobiologically change the functioning of the brain, where the normal reward system that I may get, and maybe being in this interview or maybe the work I've done in this day, that just may not be enough for me. My reward pathways in the brain are altered, such as that only cocaine will do it for me, and nothing else in life
taking
makes
the
sense.
cocaine has sort of affected that alteration as
Absolutely.
well now.
So physically, it has changed where it can just not go back to the normal everydayness of things.
That's so important, I feel, that your neurological pathways are just altered now permanently, and that requires much more work than just rehab or just sort of stop taking the drugs. And
so it depends on the substance, and depends on how long a person has been using them, and also depends on how, I mean, there are also genetic differences. Some people are more tolerant towards certain substances, and other people don't. I mean, in Asian genes, for example, it seems like we're more tolerant towards some substances and not towards other substances. So there are obviously lots of differences there, and that's why a lot of times families try to deal with it on their own. It's essential to get assessed and see how severe a problem is. Or a lot of times, problems are just brushed under the rug. That, well, we'll just let it be, or it's just a part of a person. What's the big deal that they drink every day? Whereas it's an addiction, and it's more than just substance use. It's a highly problematic behavior, and it obviously affects them. Every drug has its own shelf life. I mean, whether you can be okay in using something for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or 20, one time or the other, it's going to really wreck with your health, your mind, your body. And
I think it's really important when we talk about families, and on that point, like, hold that thought, and we're just going to take a quick break, and we will be back. Don't go anywhere. You know that this is conversation you need to hear. Bye. Come back. Hi, welcome back from the break. You're still watching The Coffee Table, and we are having a fascinating conversation about mental health and how to deal with it. So tell me, Omar, being a therapist is, I imagine, an incredibly stressful and incredibly helpful thing to do. But how do therapists kick back and relax when the going gets tough?
It's a very high burnout profession. A lot like a lot of helping professions, where especially if you're working with a lot of emotional issues, and then that can grate against you. So obviously there's every reason for therapists to also invest into their self-care, whatever that means. Nutrition, exercise, having good support systems ourselves. So therapists are also in continuous therapy themselves, having supervision, having a whole network of colleagues, that if I'm having a bad day or there's something about a client that's really bothering me, then I can either take that to a peer or to a supervisor or to my own therapist. And then also investing into self-care, whatever that may be for you to have a self-care plan, that what do I do to de-stress. So for me,
you know, like, self-care is a thing now. You know, everyone's like, treat yourself. What do you do?
I jog, and then I just have a 4-day work week. I just work for 4 days. I've successively reduced my work. I used to work with at least 25 clients. I've brought that down to 16 a week. And I have a long weekend. So, I mean, and honestly, it's changed year by year how I've really done it. I take a lot of breaks. I think I work for probably 8 or 9 months in the year, and I take some times off. So
it's really interesting that you said that therapists also have therapists. It's really interesting. It's good to know that, you know, like, your therapist is not some invincible person. That they also have a bad day, and they also need to talk to people. So it's just sort of, you know, the humanity of it is really reassuring. So Daheem, what are your hobbies? What do you do? Do you also jog?
No, I don't jog. I do work out, but I don't jog. No, I agree with Omar, you know, when he says supervision and having your own therapist and support system, peer supervision and things like those can really help you work through, you know, whatever you're going through during your sessions. Also, I think managing your client load is very important. It is actually a very high burnout profession. So you got to really see how many clients you can hold in a week, and then
which is not great for clients, but it makes you a better therapist.
No, but it is
Can I have a
actually good for your
time?
clients
Yeah,
because,
it
you know,
is.
if you're burning out, it's
Yeah.
going to affect your clients.
Quite
You know,
right.
your client care is going to go down. That's one of the first signs of burnout is that your client care is going to go down.
Yeah, yeah. So you have to look after yourself
You
first.
have to look
before...
out. So I manage my, you know, client load.
Yeah.
I watch out for that. I do private practice. I teach somewhere too one night, right? So I work till 3. After that, I don't work.
Yeah.
I do supervision, but then I get my own supervision done, especially for for client, because you know, I mean, you're holding the client, you're carrying it. It's going to affect your life. It's going to affect your work. So you need a place where you can talk about it. Then I take breaks. There's vacation, family time, things like those. You
That's
know,
really great. Like everybody needs me time and everybody needs a break, and I think that's great. Like I'm very happy to know that therapists also are humans.
Yeah, totally. If you're not human, how can you work with another human?
Yeah, that's true. So just as a sort of I don't know, a sort of a cheat sheet, as it were. I know that a lot of people have experienced symptoms of things and didn't realize that the actual thing that we're experiencing, for example, anxiety. You know, you might have palpitations, you might be nervous, you might have a stutter, you might sort of be really scared to speak up in class. You know, like even when one is younger, it's just sort of chalked down to just being shy or not being a good student, but it's actually maybe just anxiety. So like, are there sort of things that one can watch out for? Like in oneself or even in others, if you know somebody who's like that, and it would be helpful for them to be able to identify that, oh, well, actually, this is a behavior that needs to be addressed. You know, it's not entirely normal.
There are too many, you know, symptoms for anyone to list.
But sort of what are really
but
common
paying
ones?
attention to someone, I think if you see someone in distress, is something that anyone can do to actually ask what's going on. And then it can really lead into things.
Yeah.
So it could be nervousness. It could be, you know, just palpitations. It could be sad mood. It could be teary-eye. It could be lack of, you know, appetite, less sleep, you know, blurriness, confusion. There's so many. I can list like 101 symptoms.
Okay, so there's no sort of bullet point.
So for example, if I'm fidgety,
Yeah.
it could mean that I'm just fidgety, or it could be a wider symptom, which if it's taken with a couple of other things, it could mean I have anxiety. So, I mean, we don't want to pathologize every behavior, and that's happened in our field in the last couple of decades, that in us discovering that, well, here's a definition of anxiety or depression, a lot of people have self-diagnosed themselves, or at the very first occurrence of a symptom, they may make that into a disorder, or maybe self-medicate. So, I mean, we want to be cautious about it, but a general idea could be if someone's functionality could be disturbed.
Right.
Let's say that if a student is unable to go to school, or if an adult is unable to fulfill their requirements to go to work, or complete tasks, or to hold a relationship. I think that just like Daheem said, the other big thing is the subjective experience of distress. That where a person reports that, well, I'm not okay, I'm not feeling okay, I'm trying to be okay. And mostly people are suggested a whole list of things. Oh, why don't you do this? Try to pray, try to eat healthy, try to exercise.
Because a lot of times when you're feeling low and you're feeling just off about yourself, people will say this, you know, okay, oh, drink more water. And a lot of people's actual mental health issues don't get addressed.
So, I mean,
because
at that point,
one is never really sure. Like, how do you know that I need to see somebody?
So that's when you're talking about mental health. So when I am just sad, that's a mental health concern, which is that everyone's sad at one point or the other in their lives. Environment or situations can make a person sad, but sadness in a certain duration with a certain other set of things can also be a disorder, which is then called depression.
Yes.
So I think that for that, if you're feeling that, okay, as compared to last month or 2 weeks ago, I'm not functioning, I'm not sleeping, I'm just unhappy, and things are getting worse for me, I can't show up at work, people are complaining, friends are already asking. So I think that a lot of people self-diagnose themselves, but if you're in doubt, you might as well go to a therapist and just discuss that with them.
It's better to just find out that maybe it is something, and maybe it's nothing at all. But the important thing is to, then it means it's important to kind of be aware of your own patterns.
Your own level of functionality.
Yeah, that this kind of behavior is not normal for me. And if it's sort of persisting over several months or prolonged period of time, you can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't focus, then you should talk to somebody.
Usually when people come in, they either come in because they have done that process or someone has observed that in them.
So it's important for the people around you to also kind of, if somebody said it, then there must be something to it.
You're not your usual self.
So, especially on like the internet and a lot of social media, and there's a lot of sort of a talk about self-care, like you mentioned before also, read, take time out for yourself. And these are all sort of, do you think that anxiety has sort of generally become worse in the past maybe 10 or 15 years? Like there's just more conversations about it. So I'm wondering, is it because it's become worse, or is it just that we're talking more about it and trying to find ways to deal with it?
I think it's both. It's both. Definitely there are more conversations and the need for more conversations are there too, because the world's rapidly changing with all this technology and exposure and the gadget use, like little tiny babies are using gadgets. It is incredible. It's like it's everywhere. So with all of this, there's an impact. And the pressures, the stresses, the competitiveness, the Ivy League schools and, the MUNs and who's the best debater. And I mean, it's just 24 A stars in O levels. All of these factors have contributed to a lot of increase in anxiety.
And in younger people, especially.
In younger people, yes. Teenagers.
Yeah. So how are there ways that one can help an anxious person in one's life? Are there things that one can do to kind of help them manage that? Or if you have anxiety yourself, sort of are there things that you can do to kind of help manage that, like breathe or meditate or I don't know?
These are all supportive. These are all supportive interventions, breathing, yoga, taking out time for yourself, noticing your thoughts, letting them float like clouds, not kind of letting them stick and kind of forming loops. So those are all things that you can do on your own. However, sometimes you do need professional help. Yeah, you do need professional help.
I mean, that works when, for ordinary issues where someone is saying, well, I'm high strung or I'm just
or there's insight into their behavior, so you can use those supportive interventions.
I think that the more these things are made into something prescriptive, where the moment someone is saying I'm unhappy and people say, oh, but just go and do yoga, you'll be fine. It doesn't sometimes work, and I think that eventually that makes a person's issues get worse a lot of time as well. And the longer something is untreated and left untreated, sometimes those symptoms get worse then.
So what do you think of mindfulness? It sounds very Zen to me, but it's also a way of kind of focusing your attention inwards. Would that be correct to say?
You can be mindful about anything. You can be mindful about, it's focusing on one single thing.
At a time.
At a time, yes. Like I can be mindfully drinking water and just focusing on that. And the function of mind is to think about and see and notice everything, but then you train your mind to bring your attention just to that one specific task.
Especially in a world where there are so many things for the mind to focus on at any given
there's so many
moment.
Stimulations. So much stimulation around us all the time.
That's true. So it's just basically sort of finding ways to cope with the rapidly changing world. And I think that's just really, to me, it's just one of the most crucial things about mental health and getting help for it and learning how to manage your mental health, because the world is rapidly different now, and we're all in it together, but it's also something that humans are not used to. Like evolution has always been much slower than this. So this is possibly this sort of, not even century, maybe half century, has been one of like incredible change and incredible innovation, but also it's a lot to process.
I think schools is a good place. School is one of the best places to have these conversations. Because you get the parents and you get the child. You actually get the entire system.
And the earlier we can, and usually that's the very age when the problems first start emerging. There's a high incidence of childhood sexual abuse, which goes unnoticed. Eventually it continues to become something else, becomes a part of a person's personality fabric. So I think schools are great. I agree.
It's one of the, like, you know, the most fertile popular area to work with, because you can actually work with the parents. They'll come for workshops.
And I feel like protecting our children is crucial. Like you help them from the get-go, and then you just help them for the rest of their lives, really. So just setting them back on track.
But then you help the parents about awareness of mental health, what it is. You know, the importance of individuality. There's so many areas that you go in, but schools are really, you know, so conversations, workshops, campaigns, all around mental health in schools is essential right now. Is essential, I think.
I think there was a generation where I don't know if mental health existed in the way that we know of it.
Yeah, like we didn't really think of it as mental health.
A generation that's raising the new generation right now, this new generation demands from their parents that, oh, but I'm feeling this, why don't you know better, why don't you help us? So that generation, if the school systems are also involved with them, they seem to be open to the idea of working with their children, but a lot of times they don't know how. So a counselor could actually be a very good contact person who's bringing those things together and helping children at the right time, giving the help, which eventually could go a long way in the development of their strong adult personalities.
I think that makes so much sense. And again, thank you so much for being on the show, both of you, and clarifying a lot of concepts that I feel are confusing to people and sometimes intimidating to us. And it's just really helpful to know that there is help for you if you need it. And if somebody you love needs it, it's there, it's reliable, it's helpful, it's helping so many people all over the country, and it's really just a really hopeful place to be in. So thank you guys for watching. If you are watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Bye.